Hello everyone, welcome to Lifestyle in Calgary, and my name is David. In today's session, we'll be talking about the proof of funds. Now, this proof of funds in question here is for express entry or for your provincial nominations, not for the student route. So, what's the proof of funds? Proof of funds basically means an amount of money set aside for an applicant or the applicant and the accompanying spouse with dependent children. So basically an amount set aside based on the family size, right? There is a list that is updated by the Canadian government for what is the acceptable or the required proof of funds for family size, and I will leave the link to that list in the description below. So, what are the gray areas to the proof of funds? First is what is acceptable. Now, in that same link, you'd see where it states clearly that certain types of investments or instruments are not accepted for proof of funds. Things like stock, dividends are not accepted. However, treasury bills is accepted, federal government bond is accepted, deposits in your accounts is also accepted for proof of funds. So, which one should you use if you have your proof of funds? In my opinion, I'd go for the first two, treasury bills or federal government bonds. You can also use the third option, which is the statement of accounts, if you have the money in your account, right? But then it's always good to avoid investment types that would raise some questions. What do I mean by this? I could use my statement of accounts to show that I have the proof of funds. But however, I have other things that goes through my account. This could be other transactions, salary, things I'm buying online, other lifestyle needs. It could be money just moving through my account. And if I print my statement of accounts and then use that for my application, I'm simply telling the immigration officer to use that information and judge my application. That is why in some cases you see visa officers asking applicants to explain certain amounts of money that are in their accounts. Now, it doesn't mean that the proof of funds went below the amount required or it's not up to the amount. But then they've seen other amounts of money in the accounts and they can ask questions on that for you to provide explanations, and then in some cases, you may not remember those transactions. Some you may remember, but then you also have to provide answers to every particular question they ask you regarding that document. So let's say you have 10 transactions that is above $2,000 in the period of 6 months that you provided for your proof of funds in your bank accounts, and they tell you to provide explanations to all of them. You have to provide the explanation, and your explanation should be reasonable and truthful, so the immigration officer can then make a decision based on your answers. So why would I want to go that route when I could simply use an investment certificate and a reference letter from the financial institution as my proof of funds documents? So let's say you have that same amount of money in your accounts, you've had it for a while or you just got it, and you decide to go to a financial institution or an investment firm and then you buy treasury bills or you fix it in the account, you do a fixed deposit, or you buy federal government bonds or you buy treasury bills with that money, you'd get a certificate, an investment certificate. You'd also get a reference letter upon request from that financial institution. Now, the reference letter would say clearly how much you currently have with the financial institution. It could list in detail explain the interest rates, the tenor, when it would be liquidated back into your account, and in some cases you can request that they should provide the exchange rates as at when you did the investments, so that you can use that as your proof of funds document. So you have an investment certificate and also a reference letter from the institution. They can choose to contact the institution to confirm, but then your confirmation shouldn't be an issue. So that suffices for treasury bills, for federal government bonds, for investment certificates. Now, the next question or the next thing we should talk about is, what if I don't have the money now? What do I do? So I have not seen anywhere where it says you must have the money right now or 6 months before your application, right? What they want to see is that as at the time you are applying for your express entry after you receive ITA, you have the money. Because the truth is, monies can be used as capital for business. It can be used for other forms of investment. It could be in stock, it could be in dividends, and maybe by the time you receive your invitation to apply, you decide to liquidate those assets and then use it for your proof of funds. What you're meant to do that at that time is to just explain, maybe in your letter of explanation, that this is my money, this is where I brought it from, and it is going to be used for what? My proof of funds. So you could have stocks, you could have land, you could have property you want to sell. So you could do those things, right? And you could also be gifted the money by your parents, by your siblings, by your friends, or by your colleagues. So in that situation, what one should do is to get a gift deed, right? A gift deed is a simple document stating that this person is giving me this money for my immigration needs. This money is not encumbered, it is not a loan, it is not lend, I'm not paying interest on it or anything like that. It is simply my own because it's a gift. Now you can decide to notarize that document or not. It is still fine as long as the person giving you the money signs it or endorses it or stamps it. That is fine. So that way you can then use that money for your proof of funds. So if you want to take that money at that time and put in your account and leave it there throughout your application process, well and good. If you want to take that same money and put in an investment firm and buy some form of investment, treasury bills or federal government bonds or fixed deposits, that is a preferred choice. So you'd have this certificate, as I mentioned earlier, and you'd also have a reference letter. However, you can also put that in your account and it should be there intact until you get your PPR and even subsequently when you enter the country. So the only issue I see here is if at the point of the visa officer trying to conclude your application asks you for an updated proof of funds to show you still have that money, or based on things like exchange rate fluctuations and so on, you then have to go and provide your statement of accounts showing that you have that money. But let's assume that within the period of that 6 months for your application process, or the 9 months or 1 year or even 3 months, that you had that money in your account while you're waiting for your application to be processed, you spend part of that money. Now, it might not be intentional. So let's say you are passing money through your account, you receive, let's say your proof of funds is $15,000 for your family size, and then you needed to make a payment of $1,000, and then a payment came into your account, and then you sent out on that payment. Fine and good. The amount did not go below the proof of funds amount. However, that could raise questions, right? Questions like, what is that money for? Are you sure you're not paying interest? Are you paying back what you owe, or do you borrow from somebody else? Those are the reasons why I will always advise people not to use the statement of accounts. Now, this goes to show that any document you provide to immigration will be used to judge your application. So if you provide a statement of account for 6 months and the officer says for every amount above $500, give an explanation, you have to give an explanation for every amount above that threshold, which is one of those things you don't want to have to do in your application. The application process itself, it's quite overwhelming, right? You have lots of documents to think about, things to sort out, the waiting time, the patience part of it, and so on, then having to start explaining transactions before your application is what's approved, that could be quite a hassle. So, in my opinion, fix that money. It is way better, less questions. If they ask you for an updated proof of funds, you simply go to the institution. Can I get a reference letter for my investment? They'll give that to you. With that reference letter and the investment certificate, you supply those two and you're good to go. So let's say you fixed the money for 3 months or 6 months and your application was not concluded in that time, right? If it liquidates into your account, roll it over or reinvest it back. Get a certificate for it and then get a reference letter if they ask you for that. That suffices as a what? Proof of funds. So I would also advise applicants that it is important to keep your application short and what? Simple. An example would be explaining your work, what do you do, or your employment to show proof that you are employed, right? The two documents to show employment is what? Your employment letter, the first, and the second is a reference letter from your employer. Those two documents shows you're employed. Now, if the visa officer thinks it is not enough and they ask you for statement of account showing your last 3 salary payments or your pay slip, then you can provide that, right? So if originally you provide your statement of accounts as proof of employment, you're only showing transactions, you're only showing your salary payments, you will not ask that. You only asking you, just like asking you to show what? Your employment. So it is quite imperative for applicants to know that if you are not asked for a particular document, you don't need to provide it. However, anything you provide for your application will be used to approve your application or what? To deny your application. So the next thing then will be, should I spend part of my proof of funds after I receive my PPR? The answer is no. It is never advisable to spend that money after you receive your PPR. The reason is that when you get to Canada at the airport, the immigration officer could ask you a question saying, can I see your proof of funds? Do you still have it? If you don't have that money, at that time, you could be rejected. We've seen it happen so many times, and you don't want to be in that situation after going through the stress of getting personal ALTS, doing your credential evaluation, getting your ITA, waiting the time for the application to be processed, receiving the PPR, sending your passport to be stamped, and then you get into the country and then you get sent back home. So I would always advise applicants, keep that money until you get into the country. When I mean get into the country, I'm not saying at the airport. When you have crossed immigration, you've taken your bags and your family, you're in a cab or your friend that picked you up and you're going to what? Your destination. Now, the proof of fund is not where you book your flight tickets from. It's not where you buy bags and stuff from. No. That money is meant to be used right here in Canada. So I would advise you not to touch that money. It's also good to have your proof of funds as documents as part of what you show the immigration officer if you are asked that question, right? So if they ask you where's your proof of funds, if you have your treasury certificates and the reference letter, you show them right there. If you have it in your account, try and log into your mobile app and show them, right? So that you can pass that stage of the inquiry. It could happen to you, it might not happen to you, but then we've seen it happen a couple of times. Now, the last thing I would mention is to provide a buffer for your proof of funds. So over time, we've noticed that the Canadian government changes the proof of funds, and then applicants might not be aware of that change. And by the time they get a message in their email saying their profile is ineligible, they'll be wondering why, what have I done wrong? Nothing. It simply means maybe you put $18,000 for your family size, and the change for your family size has changed to 18,100. At that point, you do not have sufficient money towards coming to the country, so your profile will be ineligible. So what should one do when creating the Express Entry profile? If your family size is 1, and let's say the amount for the family size is $14,000, I would advise you to make it 15,000, right? In your actual proof of funds, make it 15,000. Now you are also trying to cater for exchange rates fluctuations. You're also trying to cater for changes they could make. So, and most times you might not know when the changes are made, and before you find out, your profile is ineligible. So always have a buffer, right? The second part of this would be if you have pension statements, right? That could also be a buffer. But have in mind that most pension statements or most pension laws states that you cannot have access to 100% of that money, probably 25% or 30% depending on the country or depending on the financial institution. So that will also be a buffer that you can use for such situations. Then lastly, try and keep your application short and simple. Try not to make mistakes in your proof of funds. If it was gifted to you by your family members, make sure you have gift deed. You can notarize it or not, but make sure you have a document stating that someone gave you the money and it's for what's your immigration application. If your husband is the accompanying spouse and you are the primary applicant or vice versa, and the money is coming from the other spouse, make sure you have a letter stating that this money was provided by your spouse and it's going to be used for proof of funds for your family, that you have access to it 100%. It is not encumbered, it is not a loan, and it is not liened in any way. So that way you don't have to start explaining much later how you got the money, and your husband should show where you got the money from and things like that. So you are trying to win the battles even before you get to that point. So these are things I would advise applicants to do. And once you do that, be rest assured you will not have any issues with your proof of funds. If you found this session interesting and helpful, please do subscribe, like, and share this video. Until next time, it's Lifestyle in Calgary.